Let's begin. But first, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the Sky High Stories. The billionaire cut his international business trip short without informing his board, his assistants, or even his pilot of the real reason. Officially, it was due to a sudden scheduling conflict. Unofficially, it was a strange, persistent unease that had followed him for days, a tightening in his chest that no deal, no contract, and no luxury hotel could quiet. No matter how many numbers he reviewed or how many meetings he led, his thoughts kept drifting back to the one place he rarely thought about anymore, home. It was well past midnight when his private jet touched down. By the time his car rolled through the iron gates of his mansion, the city lights were far behind him. The estate stood exactly as he had left it, grand, imposing, and lifeless. Inside, the halls were silent, the marble floors reflecting only dim, automated lights. No staff. No voices. No warmth. This emptiness was familiar, even comforting once. Tonight, it felt wrong. As he walked deeper into the house, an odd awareness settled over him, as if the air itself had shifted. Something was different. He couldn't explain it, but his instincts, sharpened by years of ruthless business decisions, were screaming that he was not alone. His steps slowed. His gaze scanned every corner, every shadow, every doorway he passed. When he reached the corridor leading to his bedroom, his heartbeat grew louder in his ears. This room was sacred territory, untouched, controlled, locked away from the world. He rarely even allowed staff inside. Yet now, standing before the closed door, he felt an unfamiliar hesitation, a sense of anticipation laced with dread. Memories surfaced without permission. His ex-wife standing in this very hallway years ago, her eyes full of hurt he refused to acknowledge. The arguments he chose to ignore. The night she packed her bags while he reviewed spreadsheets instead of stopping her. He had told himself that love was a distraction, that success demanded sacrifice. His hand hovered over the door handle. Whatever waited on the other side, he knew one thing with sudden clarity. This night was about to reopen a chapter he had buried under wealth, pride, and silence. He slowly pushed the bedroom door open, expecting nothing more than darkness and untouched silence. Instead, his body froze as if his feet had been rooted to the marble floor. The air left his lungs in a sharp, silent breath. There, in the center of the room he had kept pristine and empty for years, was a sight his mind refused to process at first. His ex-wife was asleep on his bed. For a moment, he thought he was hallucinating, an exhaustion-fueled trick of the mind brought on by long flights and buried guilt. But she was undeniably real. Her hair spilled loosely across the pillow, her face pale and drawn with exhaustion. Curled against her chest was a small baby, wrapped in a thin blanket, rising and falling with soft, rhythmic breaths. The room, once cold and impersonal, felt suddenly alive. Shock surged through him, followed by confusion so sharp it bordered on pain. His heart pounded as disbelief settled in. This was impossible. She had vanished from his life years ago, walking away without explanation, or so he had told himself. And yet here she was, in his most private space, holding a child in her arms as if she belonged there. He took a cautious step forward, afraid that even the slightest sound would shatter the moment. His eyes were drawn to the baby. So small. So fragile. The tiny chest moved gently with each breath, and a faint sound escaped the child's lips, soft, steady, alive. Something tightened in his chest at the sight. Then he noticed the details that cut even deeper. His ex-wife's clothes were worn, nothing like the elegant dresses she once favored. Her shoes sat near the bed, scuffed and tired, as though she had walked far before arriving here. Dark shadows rested beneath her eyes, proof of sleepless nights and quiet struggles he knew nothing about. Questions crashed through his mind all at once. How had she gotten past security? Why was she here now? And most terrifying of all, who was this baby? His gaze lingered on the child's face, searching for answers he wasn't ready to find. Standing there in the dim light, he realized this was no accident. Whatever this moment meant, his carefully controlled world had just been torn open, and there was no closing the door again. As he stood there watching her sleep, memories he had buried deep within himself began to rise, uninvited and vivid. There was a time when this woman had been the center of his world, long before the billions, before the headlines, before ambition consumed every waking thought. He remembered their early days, shared laughter in modest apartments, whispered dreams in the quiet of the night, promises made with certainty and love. She had believed in him when success was only a distant possibility. But as his empire grew, something between them slowly eroded. Meetings replaced dinners. Flights replaced weekends together. He convinced himself that everything he was building was for their future, yet somehow, she was never part of the plans he made. He came home late, distracted, always exhausted. When she tried to talk, he listened without truly hearing. When she needed reassurance, he offered logic instead of comfort. The distance wasn't sudden, it crept in silently, like a crack that widens until the foundation can no longer hold. He remembered her standing by the window at night, waiting for him, her eyes filled with a loneliness he refused to see. He told himself she would understand. He told himself love could wait. Their divorce was nothing like the passionate beginning of their marriage. It was cold, rushed, and painfully efficient. Lawyers spoke more than they did. Papers were signed without tears, without closure, without honesty. He didn't fight for her. He didn't ask her to stay. Pride and ambition had hardened him, and he mistook silence for strength. Then she was gone. She disappeared from his life completely. No calls, no messages, no chance encounters. At first, he told himself it was for the best. He buried himself deeper into work, using success as a shield against loneliness. But standing here now, years later, the weight of his choices pressed down on him. Guilt stirred in his chest, heavy and undeniable. Regret followed close behind. For the first time, he wondered what her life had been like without him, and whether his absence had cost far more than a broken marriage. He shifted his attention back to the baby, lowering himself slightly as if drawn by an invisible force. Every movement he made was slow and deliberate, careful not to wake either of them. The child slept peacefully, unaware of the storm forming just a few feet away. In the soft glow of the bedside lamp, he could see the baby's tiny fingers curled into a loose fist, the skin smooth and warm, the breathing steady and calm. As he looked closer, something inside him tightened. The baby's features stirred an unsettling familiarity he couldn't immediately place. The shape of the nose. The curve of the lips. Even the faint crease between the brows, as if the child already carried a serious nature. His heart skipped, and his thoughts faltered. He had seen that face before, every morning, reflected back at him in the mirror. A chill ran through him. His mind resisted the possibility, rejecting it as absurd, yet the idea refused to leave. Could this child be connected to him? The question echoed louder with every passing second. He counted the years, replayed timelines, searched for logic, but logic failed him now. This wasn't a boardroom problem he could solve with numbers and contracts. Fear crept in, cold and paralyzing. Fear of the truth. Fear of what he might have lost without ever knowing. But alongside it came something unfamiliar, something he had never allowed himself to feel before, a quiet, instinctive protectiveness. The urge to shield this tiny life from harm rose within him, strong and undeniable. The realization hit him with unexpected force. If this child was his, then everything he thought defined him, wealth, power, independence, suddenly felt insignificant. Responsibility settled on his shoulders, heavy yet inescapable. For the first time, the future wasn't about profits or expansion. It was about the fragile life sleeping in his bed, and the choices he could no longer avoid. A soft movement broke the heavy silence. His ex stirred, her brows knitting slightly as she shifted on the bed. Moments later, her eyes fluttered open, and instantly widened when they met his. She stiffened, clutching the baby closer to her chest as if instinctively protecting the child. For a brief second, neither of them spoke. The air between them was thick, fragile, filled with years of unspoken words. "You're back," she whispered, her voice hoarse with exhaustion and shock. He nodded slowly, still standing where he was, unsure whether taking another step forward would make things worse. His mouth opened, but no words came out. This was not a boardroom negotiation he could control. This was raw, unguarded, painfully human. "What are you doing here?" he finally asked, though the question sounded weak even to his own ears. She looked away, blinking back emotion, then glanced down at the baby. "I didn't plan for you to see us like this," she said quietly. "I didn't plan any of it." Silence stretched again, until he could no longer hold it in. His voice trembled despite his effort to remain composed. "Whose child is that?" Her grip tightened. When she looked up again, her eyes were shining. "Yours." The word landed like a blow to the chest. He felt the room spin, his breath catching as if the truth had knocked the air from his lungs. 1,000 thoughts collided in his mind, but none of them could erase what she had just said. She spoke before he could respond, the words spilling out as if she had carried them for too long. "I tried to tell you once," she admitted. "But you were never there. You were always busy, always distant. Every conversation felt like an interruption to your real life." She swallowed hard. "When I found out I was pregnant, I waited. I thought you'd slow down, that you'd notice me again. But you didn't. I realized there was no space for a baby in your world." He looked away, shame burning through him. "I didn't want our child to grow up feeling invisible," she continued. "So I left. I raised the baby alone. No money. No help. Just me." Her voice cracked. "I never wanted anything from you, until now." She gestured weakly to her worn clothes, the exhaustion in her face. "I ran out of options. I had nowhere else to go. I needed help, for the baby." Her eyes met his again, vulnerable and tired. "I didn't come here to ruin your life. I came because our child deserves more than what I can give alone." The truth hung between them, undeniable and irreversible. He said nothing. Words felt useless, inadequate against the weight of what he had just learned. He stood there in silence, staring at the woman he once loved and the child he never knew existed. The truth settled slowly, sinking deep into his chest, heavy and unrelenting. For the first time in his life, there was no decision to make, no strategy to calculate, only consequences to accept. Regret rose sharply, cutting through him with a pain he had avoided for years. He saw himself clearly now. The man who chose meetings over moments, profits over presence, ambition over affection. He had told himself he was building a legacy, yet here was the legacy he had abandoned without even knowing it existed. The irony was cruel. Images formed in his mind, milestones he had missed without ever realizing it. The birth he wasn't there to witness. The first cries he never heard. The first smile, the first steps, the sleepless nights filled with quiet bonding that no amount of money could ever replace. Those moments were gone forever, and no deal, no empire, no influence could bring them back. He looked around his bedroom, once a symbol of power and control. The expensive furniture, the polished surfaces, the carefully curated emptiness, it all felt hollow now. This mansion had been designed to impress, not to live in. It echoed with wealth but lacked warmth, meaning, and love. For years, he had measured success in numbers, assets, and expansion. Now, standing in the presence of his child, those measurements felt painfully small. His achievements no longer looked like victories, they looked like distractions. The mansion suddenly felt too large, too quiet, too empty, like a monument to everything he had sacrificed without realizing the cost. In that moment, he understood something that no mentor or rival had ever taught him. True failure wasn't losing money or power. It was realizing too late what truly mattered, and hoping it wasn't already gone forever. He took a slow step forward, then another, until he was standing beside the bed. His expression, once guarded and unreadable, softened in a way she had never seen before. Pride, the shield he had worn for years, finally cracked under the weight of responsibility. He exhaled deeply, as if releasing a version of himself he no longer wanted to be. "You can stay," he said quietly. "Both of you." "You can stay," he said quietly. "Both of you." She looked up at him, startled. "I didn't come here to." He raised a hand, stopping her gently. "No conditions," he added firmly. "No contracts. No expectations. This is your home as long as you need it to be." The certainty in his voice surprised even him. For once, he wasn't negotiating. He wasn't calculating risk. He was simply doing what felt right. His eyes returned to the baby, and after a brief hesitation, he reached out. "May I?" he asked softly. She nodded, carefully shifting the child into his arms. The moment the baby's weight settled against his chest, something inside him broke open. The tiny body fit against him perfectly, warm and real. The baby stirred slightly, a small sound escaping their lips, and instinctively, he adjusted his hold, afraid and protective all at once. His throat tightened. This wasn't fear he felt, it was connection. The kind no amount of wealth could buy. He studied the baby's face up close now, the familiar features undeniable, the bond undeniable. A strange, overwhelming emotion surged through him, blurring his vision. "I should have been here," he whispered, more to himself than to anyone else. Tears burned behind his eyes, and for the first time in decades, he didn't fight them. Holding his child stripped away the billionaire, the strategist, the untouchable figure the world feared and admired. In his place stood a man confronting love in its purest, most vulnerable form. In that quiet moment, everything shifted. He was no longer defined by titles or power. He was a father, one who had arrived late, but who was finally ready to stay. The days that followed unfolded slowly, cautiously, as if everyone in the house was afraid of moving too fast. The tension didn't vanish overnight, but it softened with time. Awkward silences were no longer heavy, they became thoughtful pauses instead. The mansion, once cold and echoing, began to feel different, filled with gentle sounds that hadn't existed there before. Small, ordinary moments began to change everything. He watched her prepare bottles in the kitchen, her movements calm and practiced. He learned the baby's schedule, memorized the cries, and found himself waking in the night without being asked. Sometimes their hands brushed as they passed the baby back and forth, and neither pulled away. There was no romance in those moments, just shared responsibility and quiet understanding. Eventually, the conversations came. Not arguments, not accusations, but honest exchanges stripped of pride. She spoke about the loneliness, the fear, the nights she cried while holding their child, wondering if she had made the right choice. He listened, truly listened, for the first time in years. When he spoke, he didn't defend himself. He admitted his mistakes, his emotional absence, the arrogance that had blinded him to what mattered most. There were no dramatic apologies, no promises of fixing the past. Instead, there was accountability. He acknowledged the pain he had caused without expecting forgiveness. She didn't offer it easily, but she didn't shut him out either. Slowly, trust began to rebuild, not as lovers trying to reclaim what was lost, but as parents learning to stand on the same side. They coordinated schedules, made decisions together, and learned how to exist in the same space without walls between them. In the quiet moments, as he watched his child sleep and saw her smile for the first time in a long while, hope slipped into the story. It didn't announce itself loudly. It simply stayed, patient and real. Life began to shift in ways he hadn't imagined. He rearranged his schedule, delegating responsibilities that once consumed every waking hour. Boardroom meetings, international deals, and constant travel, all the things that had defined him, now took a backseat. For the first time, presence mattered more than profit, and he welcomed the change with a strange, liberating sense of purpose. He committed himself fully to being a father. He learned bedtime routines, sang lullabies, and held his child through restless nights. Every giggle, every tiny milestone became a reminder of what he had missed, and what he could now nurture. He no longer measured success by wealth or accolades but by love, care, and the small victories of daily life. His relationship with his ex remained cautious, built on trust and shared responsibility. Whether it would evolve into reconciliation or remain a strong, supportive co-parenting bond was left unspoken, an open possibility that neither rushed to define. The future was no longer certain, but it was real, tangible, and alive. In the quiet moments, as he watched the child sleep peacefully and glanced at her side, he felt redemption. Not through money, power, or legacy, but through love, accountability, and the simple act of being present. For the first time, he understood that some victories could not be bought, they had to be lived. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the Sky High Stories.